200 pounds of cast iron dropped back onto a wooden pallet in the rain, and the old man folded over his own bumper, like something had cut a cable inside him. Nobody stopped. A white SUV rolled past at 4 miles an hour, and the driver never turned her head. I picked up one end. That's all. One end of a heavy machine in a parking lot on a Tuesday in November. 4 days later, a woman I had never met slid $10,000 across a white tablecloth and told me to disappear. She had a folder. My bank balance was in it. My mother's name was in it. And somewhere out there, a man with a clipboard and a warm handshake was already driving a clean white truck toward a house with an old woman in it, with a list on the seat beside him. 460 names long. Row 388. If you'd told me that a rusted F-150 and a busted tailgate would land me in a boardroom looking out over the Chicago skyline, I'd have called you a liar to your face. I was just trying to keep an old man from throwing out his back. I didn't know I was being tested. My name is Emmett Kovac. I was 29 years old that November, and I want you to understand something before I go any further. I wasn't a good man because I'd decided to be one. I was a good man because I was too tired to be anything else. Being cruel takes energy. Being calculating takes energy. I didn't have any left over. I had $1,100 of drywall compound in the back of my van and negative $406 in my business account. You do that math however you want. It never came out right for me either. The morning started at Mercy South in a waiting room with orange plastic chairs bolted to the floor and a television bolted to the wall playing a cooking show with the sound turned off. My mother sat next to me with her purse in her lap, both hands on top of it, like somebody might come take it. Loretta Kovac, 62 years old, 26 years serving trays in a hospital cafeteria 3 floors below where we were sitting. Which is the kind of joke the universe writes, and then doesn't bother to explain. Her right hand had been going numb since April. By August, she couldn't hold a coffee pot without setting it down halfway. By October, she'd started doing everything left-handed and pretending she'd always been left-handed, which I want to be clear, she has never been. Not once. Not for a single day of my entire life. The surgeon was maybe 40. Nice tie. He talked to her the way you talk to a child at a birthday party. Carpal tunnel release. Outpatient. You'll be home the same afternoon. And after 6 weeks, light duty. My mother nodded like this was reasonable information she was going to file away. Then the woman at the front desk printed out the estimate. I watched my mother's eyes move down that piece of paper, left to right, and I watched her face do the thing. It does the thing I have hated since I was 9 years old, where it goes completely calm, completely pleasant, completely still. Because that's what she does. That's her whole survival system. When something hurts, she smooths it over like a bedsheet. Well, she said, that's a lot, isn't it? Ma, I'll do it next year. Ma. Emmett. She folded the paper in half, then in quarters. Then she put it in her purse and clicked the purse shut. It's a hand. It's a hand. Like it was a lamp. Like it was a coat she could do without. I walked her out to the van. Opened her door because she can't grip a handle anymore. She thanked me for it, which killed me a little, and then I drove her to her shift, and she went in through the employee entrance with her lunch in a plastic grocery bag, because that's what she's used for. 26 years. And then I sat in the van in the parking garage, and I hit the steering wheel one time with the heel of my hand. Once. That's all I gave myself. Because if I gave myself 2, I'd have given myself 20, and I had a job at 11. The rain in Chicago that Tuesday wasn't a storm. It was an annoyance. That cold, patient drizzle that puts a film of oil on the roads and makes your knees ache just from looking out a window. November 4th. 51 degrees and going down all day, like somebody was slowly turning a dial. I was out at the big home improvement store on the south edge, the one with the contractor bays, picking up 2 boxes of 3-inch screws and a replacement drill battery I couldn't afford. My mood was foul, because a client had shorted me on a bathroom remodel. $2,200. Held back over grout color. She'd approved the sample. I have the text message where she approved the sample. She said the sample looked like eggshell in her kitchen, and the grout looked like bone in her bathroom. Bone. I stood in that bathroom with a woman who owned 2 cars worth more than my house, while she explained to me the difference between eggshell and bone. And I said, "Yes, ma'am," 4 separate times, because that $2,200 was my mother's deductible, and because arguing with people like that has never once in the history of the world gotten anybody paid. She didn't pay, so I went and bought screws. I pushed my cart out into the gray head down against the mist, already doing the thing I do, where I move money around in my head like a man playing 3-card Monte against himself. That's when I saw him. Far corner of the lot. Away from the contractor bays, away from everybody, parked at an angle like the lines were a suggestion. A Ford. Late 90s. The red had faded to the color of dried brick, and the rust had eaten around the wheel wells like something with an appetite. Tailgate down, and standing behind it, a man who had to be pushing 80. Frayed canvas jacket, faded denim, a Cubs cap pulled down low against the rain, the brim gone soft and shapeless from about 30 years of exactly this. At his feet, sitting on a heavy wooden pallet, was a cast-iron table saw, 200 pounds if it was an ounce. He had his hands hooked under the base, boots planted wide on the wet asphalt. He gritted his teeth, and he heaved. The saw came up maybe an inch, maybe. And then he made a sound, sharp, short, involuntary, the sound a man makes when his body sends a message he wasn't expecting, and the machine dropped back onto the pallet with a thud I felt in my sternum from 40 feet away. He grabbed his lower back with both hands and folded over the bumper. Stayed there. Chest going. Rain collecting on the brim of that hat and running off the front of it in a little stream. I could have kept walking. Most people were. A spotless white SUV rolled past him at maybe 4 miles an hour, wipers smearing, and I watched the driver's head not turn. Not once. Not a fraction of an inch she wasn't a villain. I want to say that clearly. She wasn't evil. She was just somewhere else in her head, the way we all are, the way I've been 1,000 times. But that's how it happens, isn't it? Nobody decides to leave an old man in a parking lot. We just don't look. I was tired. My knees hurt. I had a job at 11, and a mother who was going to spend the next year losing feeling in her hand because a woman couldn't tell eggshell from bone. But I looked at that old man bent over his own bumper, and I saw my father, 10 years gone, 61 when he died. A man who once carried a cast-iron radiator up 2 flights of stairs by himself, rather than ask a neighbor for 10 minutes of help, and who then sat down on the top step and couldn't get back up, and who told me I was 14 that he was just resting. Just resting. That's a family trait. It comes down the line like a nose. I left my cart by my van and walked over. Hey. He snapped his head up so fast it must have hurt him. And the look on his face, I'll never forget it. Not scared, insulted, like I'd walked in on him doing something private. I got it, he said, gravel in the voice, all defense. I know you've got it. I stepped into the puddle by his boots, so we'd be close enough that he couldn't pretend he hadn't heard me. But that thing's a beast. Name's Emmett. Let me take the other side before we both stand out here and drown. He hesitated. I watched him do the arithmetic, the saw, the height of the tailgate, the rain, his back, and then me. Some stranger with drywall dust in the seams of his knuckles. Pride fought gravity. Gravity is undefeated. Hollis, he muttered. Little nod. All right, Hollis. You take the left, I'll take the right. On 3, we get it to the lip, then we push. Don't lift with your back, let my legs do the work. Ready. He grunted. We crouched. The cast iron was freezing. Slick. My fingers went under the lip, and the cold went through them like a wire. 1, 2, 3. We heaved, and the weight was immediate and punishing and honest, the way real weight always is the way. It doesn't care who you are or what you've got in the bank, and my boot slid maybe a quarter-inch on the wet pavement before it caught. We got it to the lip. Metal scraped over rusted metal with a sound like a wounded animal. Push! We shoved, and the saw slid over the ribbed bed of that truck and settled by the wheel well with a thud that sounded, I swear to you, satisfied. I stepped back, shaking out my hands. He leaned against the side of the truck and pulled a soiled handkerchief out of his pocket and wiped the rain off his face. Appreciate it. He didn't look at me when he said it. No sweat. Building a cabinet shop. Refinishing some old chairs. He said it to the truck, not to me. Then keeps my hands busy. House gets too quiet. House gets too quiet. 5 words. And I understood the whole shape of his life from 5 words the way you sometimes do. He reached into the cab and came out with a battered steel thermos. Dented on one side, the kind of dent that happens once and stays forever. He unscrewed the cup and poured out a steaming measure of black coffee and held it toward me. Take it. It's fresh. I took it. Scalding. Bitter. No sugar, no mercy. Exactly what I needed. So we stood there in the freezing drizzle. 2 strangers. 1 cup between us. My daughter hates this truck, he said suddenly, staring at the rusted hood. Hates the saw, too. Bought me a fancy electric one. Plastic parts. Broke in a month. He put his hand flat on the cast iron. This here'll outlive us both. They don't make 'em like they used to. He snorted. Actually snorted. They don't make anything like they used to, including people. And then he said the thing I would think about later in a stairwell in a hospital hallway, in a warehouse in February with sawdust in my hair. My daughter's successful, made a lot of money, lives up in one of those glass towers downtown. He shook his head slowly. But she don't trust nobody, thinks the whole world's trying to pick her pocket. I laughed. God help me, I laughed. With the economy the way it is, she might not be all the way wrong. And Hollis turned and looked at me. Not a glance. A look. Pale blue eyes, weather-cut face, and something behind it that was doing math I couldn't see the numbers of. She works too hard, he said. Needs somebody who isn't scared of a bank account. A regular guy. Somebody who can pick up something heavy without calling a committee first. I smiled and handed the cup back. Well, good luck to her. And to you, watch your back with that thing. Wait. He pulled a crumpled notepad from his chest pocket. Stubby pencil behind his ear, like a man who'd kept a pencil there for 60 years. Give me your number. Hollis, you don't owe me anything. It was a lift. I know I don't owe you. Snapped it. all the gruffness back at once like a door slamming. "I want your number. You do contracting, maybe I need a wall knocked down. Just give it to me." So I sighed and rattled it off. He wrote it down slow, pressing hard. Then he got in the truck, and it roared to life and coughed a cloud of black exhaust into the wet air, and he gave me one wave. One economical. A man who does not waste motion, and rattled out of the lot. I went back to my van. I forgot about him. I went back to my life. Except here's what I didn't see. 2 blocks down, the old man pulled over. He sat there with the wipers going, engine idling rough, and he reached into the inside pocket of that canvas jacket and took out a different piece of paper. Older. Softer. Folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone furry. There was a name written on it. Emmett Kovac. Written 3 weeks earlier in a different hand by a man at the Carpenter's Hall who'd said, when Hollis asked who could run a job site, "Honest, there's a young guy, does residential. Does it right? Turned down a builder over cheap materials last year, and it cost him." Kovac. Kovac. Hollis had put that name in his pocket and carried it for 21 days. He had not known the face. He had not planned the parking lot. He'd gone to buy a table saw and hurt his back, same as any old man. But when the kid who helped him said name's Emmett Hollis, stopped believing in coincidence at 8 years old, and had never taken it back up. He looked at the paper for a long moment. Then he said out loud, to nobody in a truck his daughter hated, "Estelle, you're not going to believe this one." 4 days. The rain quit, and a cold front came in behind it and froze every puddle in the city solid overnight. I was elbow-deep in fiberglass insulation on a residential job Saturday morning when my phone buzzed. I ignored it till lunch because when you're a one-man outfit, the phone is always either money or a problem, and I wasn't in the mood to find out which. Then I sat in the van with a gas station sandwich, and I looked. Unknown number. "Emmett, it's Hollis from the hardware store. I want to buy you lunch to say thank you. Monday, burst 00. The Vireo Room, North Michigan, 20th floor." I stared at that. North Michigan. I know what's on North Michigan. Everybody in this city knows what's on North Michigan. So I did what any broke man does. I looked it up. No prices on the menu. Which, if you've never been broke, let me explain something. A menu with no prices isn't fancy. A menu with no prices is a door with a lock on it. It's a room telling you that if you have to ask, the answer's already no. Sparkling water. $18. $18. I sat in a van that smelled like insulation and old coffee, holding a $4 sandwich, and I laughed out loud. Alone. Like a crazy person, I typed Hollis. You really don't have to do that. Coffee in the lot was plenty. The reply came back before I could put the phone down. I insist. Don't be late. And that was it. That was the whole thing. A stubborn old man in a Cubs cap wanted to square a debt that didn't exist, and I couldn't figure out how to say no to that without being the kind of man who says no to that. Maybe he was lonely. Probably he was lonely. So I said yes. I said yes to a lunch. Here's a thing nobody tells you about being broke. It's not the not having. You get used to the not having. The not having becomes a kind of furniture you walk around in the dark without bumping into. It's the deciding. Every hour of every day deciding. Coffee or gas. Battery or dinner. The good screws or the ones that strip. By 29, I had made so many small decisions about money that I'd worn a groove in my own brain. And that Monday morning, standing in front of a closet with 4 shirts in it, I made one more. I did not wear the nice shoes. I had a pair. Black. Leather. Bought for my father's funeral, and worn maybe 6 times since still in the box on the closet shelf, with the tissue paper folded over them, like a body. I looked at that box for a long time, and then I put on my work boots. Because if a man is going to be measured, he ought to at least stand still while it happens. I took the red line downtown. The city changed outside the window, the way it always does. Brick and vinyl siding, and taquerias, and beauty supply, and then a stretch of nothing, and then glass. All at once. Glass and granite and awnings with a doorman under every one. Same city, different planet. I came up out of the station into wind that came off the lake with an opinion, and I walked 3 blocks north with my collar up and my hands in my pockets, past a store selling a single handbag in an entire lit window, like it was a relic in a museum, and I thought somebody bought that. Somebody woke up and bought that. The lobby ceiling was 40 feet high, white marble, veined gray floor to ceiling, like the whole room had been carved out of one enormous piece of frozen milk, and it was quiet. That's what I remember. It was quiet the way money is quiet. My boots on that floor sounded like a hammer. I found the elevator bank for the Vireo room, rode it to 20, watched the numbers climb, and did the thing I always do in elevators, which is look at the inspection certificate, because a man who's rebuilt a load-bearing wall never fully relaxes inside a machine. The doors opened, and I stepped into a hush. Dark hard wood, low amber light, the kind that makes everybody look 10 years younger and 40% more forgiven. A carved oak bar running the whole left side, populated by men in wool suits that had been fitted, and women in silk blouses that cost more than my transmission. The conversation had a sound like water in another room. Nobody laughed out loud. I remember noticing that. In an entire restaurant at lunch in a city famous for being loud, nobody laughed out loud. I walked up to the hostess stand. She was maybe 26. Perfect posture. And she looked at me. She did it fast, and she did it professionally, and I don't think she even knew she was doing it, which is somehow worse. Boots, jeans, hands. She got to my hands, and she stopped, and I watched her decide. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "I'm meeting someone. Hollis. I don't actually know his last name." Which say that out loud in a room like that, and listen to how it sounds. She checked her tablet. "I don't have a reservation under Hollis." "Maybe he's not here yet." "Except." "Are you Emmett?" The voice came from behind me. It was not gravel. It did not belong to a 78-year-old man in a Cubs cap. I turned. Now, before I tell you about her, I have to tell you about her morning, because I didn't learn about it until much later, and it changes everything. And if you don't know it, you're going to hate her, and I need you not to hate her yet. 8:45 that morning, 38th floor. A boardroom with a table long enough to land a small plane on. Marlo Renner, 32 years old, CEO since she was 28, sat at the head of it, and listened to a man named Curtis Vandermeer explain gently warmly with enormous concern that the board had noticed some things. The founder's personal spending, real estate purchases, cash withdrawals, a warehouse in Pilsen of all places. And Vandermeer said the word, conservatorship. He said it the way you'd offer someone a chair. And Marlo Renner sat very still in a very good jacket and understood that 11 people were considering whether to take her father's life away from him and hand it to a committee, and that if she pushed back too hard, they'd start looking at her, and that if she didn't push back at all, they'd do it by spring. Then she went downstairs, got in the car, and went to have lunch with a stranger who'd gotten her father's private cell number in a parking lot. Now I'll tell you about her. Early 30s, Charcoal blazer tailored close, crisp white blouse. Dark hair pulled back into a knot at the nape of her neck, so severe it looked like a decision she'd made angry. Leather portfolio under one arm. Green eyes, sharp green. And they were looking at me with the exact same suspicion the old man had shown me in that parking lot, except where his was stubbornness wearing a coat, hers was surgical, cold and clean, and already halfway through the incision. Yeah, I'm Emmett. I'm Marlowe. She did not offer her hand. Hollis is my father. Oh, recalibrating. Nice to meet you. Is he running late? My father isn't coming. She said it smoothly, barely a beat. Then she looked past me. Table for two, please, Danielle. Right this way, Ms. Renner. And the hostess, who had spent 10 seconds deciding whether I was a delivery, went liquid with deference in about a quarter of a second, and I stood there holding the very distinct sensation of having walked into a room that closed behind me. Marlowe was already moving. She expected me to follow, so I followed, through the maze of white-clothed tables, past the glances, quick and curious, catalogued and dismissed. A man in a shirt with no tie and boots with a scuff on the right toe. Corner booth. Window. 20 floors down the river went by the color of a nickel, and the buildings made a canyon out of the middle of my city, and I sat down across from a woman who had a folder with my name on it. She sat with her spine 3 inches off the leather. She set the portfolio on the table, put both hands flat on top of it, and stared at me. A waiter materialized out of the air the way they do in places like that. Still or sparkle. Still. No ice. Tap's fine for me. He vanished. So there we were. And I want to be honest with you, because I've been honest this far. She was beautiful. Undeniably. The kind of face that photographs for annual reports. But there was something coming off her, like heat off a radiator. A tension. A hum. She looked like something that had not slept properly in 4 years. So, I leaned back into the booth. Your dad stood me up. My father, she said, and her voice was measured out like a dose is at his house right now. Entirely unaware this lunch is happening, I intercepted his schedule. Okay. Why? She didn't blink. Because my father is an aging man whose mind is sliding into a dangerous kind of sentimentality. And because you're a stranger who somehow got his private cell number after a 5-minute encounter in a parking lot. A pause. I'm here to find out what your angle is. I looked at her. The silence stretched. The waiter came back and poured our water with absolutely silent efficiency and retreated like a man who'd been trained to sense weather. My angle. Yes. And she opened the portfolio. Inside was 1 sheet of paper. 1. Which is somehow worse than a stack. A stack means they're guessing. 1 page means somebody organized it. She glanced down at it. She didn't need to read it. She'd read it already. She was just showing me that she had it. Emmett Kovac, 29. Independent contractor, sole proprietor, no employees. Business is struggling. Last month your operating account went negative before a final payment cleared. My jaw set. No criminal record, which is a point in your favor. Substantial student debt from an architecture program you did not finish. 3rd year. I made it to 3rd year. 2 years ago, you walked off a build in Bridgeport over material substitutions, and it cost you the contract and 2 subsequent referrals. And there, I felt the floor move. Because that job wasn't in a lawsuit. That job wasn't in a court record. That job was me standing in a stairwell with a builder who wanted quarter-inch where the drawing said 5/8, and me saying no, and him saying, then get off my site, and me getting off his site. Nobody wrote that down. Somebody had to go ask somebody, which means somebody had spent real money and real hours on a man who owned a van and a dog-eared code book. You didn't run a background check, I said. My voice came out lower than I meant it to. Ran an investigation. I run background checks on anyone who tries to infiltrate my father's life. That's not what I said. She didn't answer that, which was an answer. And then she turned the page a half-inch and I saw it. Second name on the sheet, Loretta Kovac. Address, employer, 26 years. And a line item scheduled procedure deferred sitting there in 8-point type on a piece of paper in a restaurant where the water cost $18. Everything went very quiet in me. Not loud. People think rage is loud. Real rage is the quietest thing there is. It's a room where somebody turned off a machine you didn't know was running. I put both hands flat on the tablecloth. Slow. You looked into my mother. I looked into your. She's 62 years old. And Marlo Renner stopped. For the first time since she'd said my name, she stopped. She's been carrying trays at Mercy South since I was 3. Her hand's been going numb since April. She can't hold a coffee pot. She's putting off the surgery because it's $4,000 out of pocket, and she thinks, I don't know, that's why. Don't do this here. Don't give them this. And you printed it out. Silence. You put my mother's hand on a piece of paper, and you brought it to lunch. Something moved behind her eyes. I want to be fair to her, even now. Something moved. Not much. A flicker, like a light in a house across a field. But she'd built the whole thing already. She'd built the case, and rehearsed the meeting, and driven here from a boardroom where 11 people had said the word conservatorship, and she was not going to be talked out of it by a man in boots. He's the founder and former majority shareholder of Renner Freight, she said. He's worth over $800 million. I'm the current CEO. $800 million. I want you to understand, I heard that number, and it didn't mean anything. It's not a number. It's a weather system. You expect me to believe you happened to help him with a table saw, and he happened to invite you to a 4-star restaurant. And I sat there, in that room with the silverware clicking on china, and the muted conversations about mergers and quarterly forecasts, and the amber light making everybody look forgiven. Wearing cheap boots, across from a billionaire who thought I was a con man. Let me get this straight. Level. I kept it level. You think I staked out a hardware store on the South Side? In the rain. In November. Waiting for a billionaire in a rusted 1998 F-150 to buy a table saw, so I could pretend to help him lift it, so I could get invited to lunch. People do desperate. And then what? She stopped. Blackmail him, marry him, move into Tskujin. What's the plan, Ms. Renner? Walk me through the plan, because I've got a job at 4, and I'd love to hear how it ends. My father is eccentric. Her voice came up half a step, and she pulled it back down like a dog on a leash. He insists on driving that death trap. He insists on going to hardware stores himself instead of letting staff handle it. High as a target. He's an old man who wanted to build some chairs. You don't. He was in pain, in a parking lot, in the rain, and I picked up one end of a bar. I leaned forward an inch. That's the conspiracy. That's the whole thing. And that's when she reached into the portfolio again. I watched her do it, and some part of me, the part that had been doing 3-card Monte with my own bank account since I was 22, that part of me knew what was coming before I saw it. A checkbook, slim, embossed corner, a fountain pen, which she uncapped, real ink, real pen. She wrote with her whole hand the way people used to be taught. "I appreciate your assistance in the parking lot," she said, and every degree of heat had gone out of her, and she was back to being a woman closing an item. "My father shouldn't be lifting heavy objects. I'm willing to compensate you for your time and for the kindness you showed him." Scratch of the nib. "But this ends here. No more texts, no more lunches." She tore it out and slid it across the white tablecloth with 2 fingers. I looked down. $10,000. And listen, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I felt nothing. My breath caught. It did. For about a second and a half, my chest went tight, and my whole body did math without my permission, the way a body does. $10,000. That was the negative 406 gone. That was the $2,000 in tools I'd been repairing instead of replacing. That was 6 months of rent. That was my mother's hand. That was my mother's hand in January instead of never. That was her holding a coffee pot again. That was her not doing everything left-handed and pretending she'd always been left-handed. $10,000 was my mother's hand, sitting on a tablecloth 3 feet away, with a fountain pen still uncapped beside it. I looked up. Marlo Renner had sat back, and on her face was a look I have seen exactly twice in my life, and hope never to see again. Satisfaction. Not cruelty, not triumph, satisfaction. The quiet relief of a woman who has just been proven right about the world. Every man has a price, and she'd just found mine, and it had taken her less than 4 minutes, and somewhere in her, a door was closing. That I understood even then. Even angry had been closing a little further every year for 4 years. And what I felt, God help me, wasn't rage. It was tiredness. Not the tiredness of hanging drywall. A different one. The bone-deep exhaustion of living in a world so bent that a man cannot pick up one end of a heavy object without it having to be a transaction. Where kindness gets a file opened on it. Where an old man in the rain is a liability and a stranger's hands are a risk, and every decent thing anybody does has to be run past legal. I have never in my life been so tired. I didn't yell. I didn't stand up fast. I didn't make a scene because making a scene in a room like that is exactly what they expect from a man in boots, and I wasn't going to give it to them. I reached into my back pocket, took out my wallet, a wallet that had been restitched twice by my own hands, because I fix things, that's what I do, and I pulled out a $10 bill, crumpled, soft. It had been folded in that wallet for 11 days. I laid it on top of the check and slid them both back across the table. Marlo frowned, and for 1 second, the mask slipped clean off and underneath. It was just a tired woman who was genuinely completely confused. "What is this?" "The $10 is for the water." I slid out of the booth and stood up. "The check's yours. Keep it." "Excuse me?" "You need it more than I do." "Excuse me," sharper now. A flare of real anger finally breaking the surface, and I'll tell you honestly, I was glad to see it. It was the first human thing she'd done. I leaned down, rested my knuckles on the tablecloth, looked her dead in the eyes. "Your dad told me about you. In the parking lot." She went still. "He said you were successful. He said you lived in a glass tower." Quiet. Very quiet. "He also said you don't trust anybody." I thought he was just being an overprotective father. I shook my head slow. "He was wrong." Her chin came up. "You're not just distrustful. You're miserable. You're worth $800 million, And you spent money running an investigation on a man who didn't want your father to get hurt in a parking lot. You put a 62-year-old woman's surgery in a folder. You brought a fountain pen to lunch. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. That has got to be an exhausting way to live. I don't want your money. I straightened up. And I don't want anything from your family. Next time your dad needs help lifting something, hire someone to stay with him. Or go with him yourself. And that last part landed. I saw it land. I hadn't even meant it to. I turned and walked out, past the oak bar and the wool suits and the amber light. Past the hostess who said, have a good afternoon, sir, on reflex, because the woman I'd come in with had turned out to be Ms. Renner, and now I was somebody. I didn't take the elevator. I took the emergency stairs. 20 floors and my boots on that concrete made a sound like a clock, and I let the echo of it walk the anger down out of my chest, one flight at a time. 19, 15, 11, you should have taken it. 7, your mother's hand. You should have taken it. 4, no. 2, because if I take it, she's right. And if she's right, then the whole thing's true, that a man like me can be bought for one afternoon of a woman like her. And my father carried a radiator up 2 flights of stairs by himself, and my mother has served trays for 26 years, and neither one of them ever sold anything they couldn't get back. Ground floor. I pushed the door open, and the wind off the lake hit me like a hand. Freezing, but clean. I stood on Michigan Avenue in November with cold air going into my lungs like something scouring me out. And a woman walked past, pushing a stroller, and a bus sighed at the light. And the city just kept on being the city. I took the train home. I got in my van, drove to the job site, and I tore down drywall until 5:30 with my shoulders screaming and my hands raw and gypsum dust in my eyelashes. I didn't tell my mother, not one word, because if I told her, there had been $10,000 on a table, and I'd left it there, she would have smiled at me and said, "Good for you, honey." And then she would have gone into the kitchen and stood there for a while with the water running. 3 days went by. Cold snap. The puddles froze solid and stayed that way. I blocked Hollis Renner's number on Thursday morning, sitting in my van outside a job in Beverly, and it took me 4 minutes because I kept putting the phone down, because that's not the kind of thing I do. But an old man had bought me a cup of coffee out of a dented thermos and told me his house was too quiet, and 4 days later his daughter put my mother's hand in a folder. So, I figured that was the end of it. The briefest collision of 2 different worlds, corrected immediately by gravity and tax brackets. Except, Thursday night I was standing at my sink eating lukewarm takeout out of the container because a man who lives alone stops using plates around age 26, and somebody knocked on my door. Heavy, rhythmic, 3 then 2. I wiped my hands on a paper towel. I wasn't expecting anybody. I have never been expecting anybody. I walked over, checked the deadbolt out of habit, and pulled it open. It wasn't Hollis. It was her. Marlo Renner, standing alone in the hallway of my apartment building at 8:40 on a Thursday night in November, under a bulb with a dead moth in it. No blazer, no portfolio. A heavy wool coat, both hands shoved in the pockets, and her hair down, which I hadn't seen, and which took 10 years off her and put about 40 on, if that makes any sense at all. She looked small. The hallway smelled like old cabbage and somebody's cigarettes and the wet carpet smell that never goes away in a building built in 1924. She had heels on, in that hallway, on that carpet. Emmett. I closed the door. Not slammed. I want to be accurate because I've thought about it a lot since. I didn't slam it. I closed it the way you close a door on a solicitor, which is worse. Slamming is passion. Closing is no thank you. Then I stood there with my hand still on the deadbolt and my forehead about 4 inches from the wood, and I listened, because I could hear her breathing on the other side. I'm not here about the check. Muffled. Through 1.5 inches of 1924 door, nothing from me. I'm here because... A pause. Because I've been sitting in the car downstairs for 40 minutes. Don't. I did the math 4 different ways on the drive over, and every single version of this conversation ends with you not opening the door. Don't you dare. So I understand. I do. I just do. Another pause. Longer. I've never done this before. I don't actually know what this is supposed to sound like. And I want you to know something. My hand was on the lock. My hand was on the lock, and I turned it about 1/8 of an inch, which is nothing, which is less than nothing. And then I thought about a piece of paper with my mother's employer printed on it in 8-point type. Scheduled procedure deferred. And my hand came off the lock. I stood in my kitchen after that with the takeout going cold, and I did not turn on the television. I don't know how long. 15 minutes, 20. Long enough to hear her heels go down the hall. Stop. Come back 4 steps. Stop again. And then go all the way down and out, which is a sound I would think about for a long time afterward. A woman in $900 shoes turning around twice in a hallway that smelled like cabbage. 2 days. Saturday night. Cold enough that the windows had gone furry at the corners. And somebody knocked again. Heavy. Rhythmic. 3, then 2. This time it was the old man. Same frayed canvas jacket. Same Cubs cap damp across the crown. Face set in a scowl you could have used to level a floor, and 4 feet behind him, in the same wool coat hands in the same pockets, stood his daughter. She would not look at me. She was looking at the carpet like she was pricing it. "You blocked my number," Hollis said. "Yeah, Hollis, I did." I leaned on the doorframe, kept it flat. "No offense, but your daughter made it pretty clear I'm a security threat. Figured I'd save us both the trouble." And the old man turned around. Slow. All the way around on those bad hips so that he was facing her. And he didn't say one word. He just looked at her. 10 seconds. 15, long enough that she shifted her weight, and then shifted it back, and then finally looked up. Hollis turned back to me. "I told you," he said. "She's an idiot." Dad. And that word, that one word, because I had heard this woman say, $800 million, like she was reading a weather report, and I had heard her say, "I run background checks on anyone who tries to infiltrate my father's life without one crack in it." And now she said Dad, and it came out strained, frayed at the edge, human. Hollis ignored her completely. He looked at me, and his eyes softened maybe 2%. "Can we come in, Emmett? Or are you going to make an old man stand in this drafty hallway all night?" So I looked at Hollis. Then I looked at her. The Billionaire CEO, standing in a hallway that smelled like cabbage and cigarettes under a bulb with a dead moth in it, looking like she wanted the floor to open up and take her. And I stepped back and pulled the door wide. "Come on in," beat. "I'm out of fancy water." Hollis walked into my apartment like he'd bought the building. He didn't sneer at the scuffed linoleum in the entry. Didn't look at the water stain on the ceiling near the smoke detector. He took off that damp cap, shook it out once, and looked around the way an old tradesman looks at any room he's ever been in. Then he rapped a knuckle against the door frame. "Knock, knock." "Place is built solid," he grunted. "Lath and plaster back behind that drywall." You don't get soundproofing like that in the garbage they're putting up downtown. Keeps the wind out. Marlo was still in the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, knuckles white. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of a minefield, holding a map she'd drawn herself. "You can come in," I said, flat. I already swept for listening devices. And she winced. Small, a tightening around the eyes, maybe a quarter-inch of movement. But I saw it, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't enjoy it because I'm telling you this honestly, or not at all. She stepped over the threshold and shut the door behind her. My apartment is a shoebox. Kitchen and living room are one room split by a chipped Formica table. I pulled out of a diner renovation in 2019 and carried up 2 flights on my back. Couch that's decent. TV on a cinder block stand. A stack of blueprints on the coffee table for a certification exam I'd been studying 6 months for and rescheduling every 8 weeks. It was clean. I keep it clean. But you could feel the money missing. It's got a hum to it. Anybody who's ever lived in a place like that knows exactly the hum I mean. Hollis went straight for the fridge and opened it without asking. "You drink this." He came out with a can of the cheap stuff. Store brand, 12 for $9. When I'm not drinking tap water. "I'll take one." He cracked it, took a long pull, and let out a sigh like a man setting down a load. Then he walked to the Formica table, dragged out a vinyl chair, and sat down heavy, and pointed one thick, ruined finger at the chair across from him. "Sit." Marlo unbuttoned her coat. Underneath a plain gray sweater, jeans, and I remember thinking, she owns jeans, of course she owns jeans, everyone owns jeans, but I hadn't pictured it, and it rearranged something in my head about her that I didn't ask permission for. She looked exhausted. The surgical thing from the restaurant was gone. Completely gone. What was left underneath looked 10 years older and like it hadn't slept properly since roughly 2021. She sat, hands folded in her lap like a woman at a funeral. Hollis took another sip, looked at me leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "She's got something to say to you." Stern, but underneath it, and I heard this, I heard it clear underneath it, was a bone-deep tiredness. The specific tiredness of a father who has spent 4 years watching his kid fight the entire world on his behalf and lose a little more of herself every round. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. For a long time, the only sound in that apartment was the radiator kicking on in the corner. That old clank-clank hiss. Every building on the south side has that radiator. Every one. Marlo traced a coffee ring on the Formica with her index finger. Around and around. I was wrong. Quiet. It didn't echo the way it had in that restaurant. "Okay." She looked up, green eyes slightly bloodshot. "I wasn't just wrong, Emmett. I was cruel." Pause. "And I'm sorry." I let it hang there, because I wanted to see if she'd fill it. That's the tell. People who aren't really sorry can't stand the silence after an apology. They rush in and start explaining, and the explanation is always the actual apology, and the actual apology is always, "I had a reason." She didn't. She just sat there and waited for a verdict from a man in a rented shoebox. Why'd you do it Marlo level? You don't get to be a CEO by being stupid. And it was a profoundly stupid move to try and buy me off. Hollis snorted into his beer. Told her the same thing. Marlo closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them, the walls were down. 4 years ago, my mother died. Flat. She said it flat, the way you have to say certain sentences. Cancer. It was fast. 11 weeks from the scan to the funeral. She glanced at her father. Hollis had become extremely interested in the label on his beer can. My father didn't handle it well. Marlowe. He didn't. Marlowe. You didn't, Dad. And she kept going. He stepped back from the company. He started wandering. Going to bars he hadn't been in since 1974. Buying junk at estate sales. Talking to people. She took a slow breath. Talking to everybody. And he met a man. I felt it coming before she said it. The way you feel a truck before you hear it. Lyle Prosser, 40-something. Contractor. There it is. Said he was going through a rough divorce. Needed a loan to keep his business afloat. She turned the beer can a quarter turn on the table. Didn't drink it. My father, being who he is, didn't just give him a loan. He gave him an open line of credit. He brought him into the house. He had him at Thanksgiving. Her voice dropped. He treated him like a son. How much? Just under $2 million. And I whistled. I couldn't help it. $2 million. But it wasn't the money, she said. The money is just math. Then what was it? And Marlowe Renner looked at her father, and her father did not look up from that beer can, and she said he told my dad he was one of my mother's students. Everything in the room went sideways. What? My mother taught shop and vocational counseling for 31 years. Estelle Renner. 3 different high schools, mostly South and West Side. She had thousands of kids come through. Marlowe's hands had gone very still on the table. When she died, the obituary ran in 3 papers. There was a memorial notice. There was a guest book online. Oh no. He read it. Oh no. He read the obituary, and he studied it, and 11 weeks later he walked up to my father in a bar on Archer Avenue and said, "Mr. Renner, I don't know if you remember me. Mrs. Renner taught me. She's the reason I'm in the trades." Hollis put the can down on the Formica, very gently, and he spoke for the first time in about 4 minutes, and his voice came out like something dragged over gravel. He knew her middle name. Nobody said anything. He knew she kept butterscotch candies in the top drawer. He knew she made the boys shake hands at the end of every semester. He looked at the table. Everything he knew he got off the internet and out of a guest book. And I sat there, and I let him tell me about my wife. And that is when I finally understood the whole thing. Because I'd been sitting there thinking this was about $2 million. And it wasn't. It was never about $2 million. It was about a lonely man in a bar 11 weeks after burying his wife of 49 years, and a stranger who walked up and said, "She mattered to me too." And how do you press charges on that? How do you stand up in a courtroom in front of a judge and a clerk and a court reporter and say my wife was dead, less than 3 months, and a man told me he loved her, and I gave him everything, because I would have given anything at all to be in a room where somebody was still talking about her? You don't. You eat it. You eat it, and you drive a rusted truck, and you refinish old chairs because the house gets too quiet. You never filed, I said. No. Hollis, I know what it is. Sharp. Don't. He's still out there. I know what he is. Then, because if I file, the old man said, and his hand came down flat on the Formica table, and the beer cans jumped, then it goes in the paper, and then it's not a man stealing $2 million off a fool. It's a man who used a dead woman's name to do it, and every single person she ever taught reads that. Silence. 31 years of her work, he said, and that becomes the story. Marlowe was crying. Not the way people cry in movies. No sound at all. 2 lines, and she didn't wipe them, because wiping them would have been admitting they were there. "I didn't know that part," she said. "About her name. I found out from the lawyers. 8 months after. I didn't want you to know. I know you didn't. Marlo. You let me think you were just a lonely old fool, Dad. Her voice broke clean in half on the word fool. For 4 years, I let people say that about you in rooms you weren't in. And I never corrected them. Because I thought it was true. Hollis Renner reached across that chipped Formica table with a hand that had been loading freight since he was 18 years old. And he put it over his daughter's hand. And he didn't say anything at all. I got up. Because there are moments a man shouldn't be in the room for, and there was nowhere in that apartment to go. So I opened the fridge and stood in front of it for a while, like I was looking for something. I came back with 2 more beers, set one end in front of Marlo, and sat down in the 3rd chair. When the lawyers finally got in, she said after a while, Prosser didn't flinch. Not once. He knew we wouldn't file. He'd already figured out we wouldn't file. She turned the can again. Quarter turn. He laughed, and he said old men are easy marks. Beat. That's a direct quote. That's the sentence. So yes, Emmett, I live in a glass tower, and I think everyone is a parasite. Because I had to take over a 900-person company at 28 years old, with a father who wouldn't get out of bed. Her chin came up, and I had to become the attack dog, so that he could have the luxury of remaining a good man. Oh, that's it. That's the whole thing. And when I saw that a 29-year-old contractor with negative $400 in his account had suddenly befriended my father in a hardware store parking lot, she stopped. I didn't see a good Samaritan. You saw it happening again. I saw it happening again. And I moved to eliminate the threat. The radiator clanked. And I looked at Hollis, and the old man was staring at the table with his face set in something so old and so hard it had stopped being grief and turned into architecture. He hadn't been an easy mark. He'd been a man who missed his wife. There's a difference, and there's no word for it in any legal document ever written. Then I looked at her, at the armor, and I actually thought this, sitting at that table. That thing is heavier than my tool belt, and she's had it on for 4 years, and nobody has ever once offered to help her take it off. 2 million's a hell of a hit, I said, and drank. It wasn't about the money. I know. It was about the trust. I leaned forward, forearms on the table. I accept your apology, Marlo. She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since the hallway. But you need to understand something. I'm not that guy. I work for my money. My hands are wrecked by 5 o'clock every day of my life, and I earn every dime that goes into that account. I know. You came at me like I was a thief, and you used a checkbook like my mother is not a line item. That one hit her physically. I watched it land in her shoulders. No, she said. She isn't. Don't ever do that to me again. Marlo Renner looked at me and did not flinch. You have my word. And then the old man slammed his hand flat on the table and made every empty can on it jump 3 inches. Good, he barked it. Now that the Bleeding Hearts Club is adjourned, we've got business. I blinked. Business. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper and tossed it onto the Formica like a man throwing down cards. I unfolded it, and I stopped breathing for about 1.5 seconds. It was a hand-drawn plan. Primitive. Pencil. Straighted G and stubbornness work no scale bar, no title block dimensions written in with the numbers crowding each other. But it was a floor plan. A big one. And whoever drew it had bays. Woodworking on the north wall, metal on the east with a fire separation, an automotive bay with a pit and a 2-story mezzanine over the classroom space. I bought a building, Hollis said. Pilsen, old brick warehouse off 21st. 1904 mill construction timber columns you could park a train on. Hollis, ground floor's going to be a community workshop, woodworking, metal, automotive, small engine. He tapped the paper twice with one finger. A place for kids who don't want to stare at a screen all day to learn a trade. Free. No tuition, no application. You show up, and you sign in, and somebody hands you a tool. I looked at that drawing. You drew this. Estelle drew the first one, he said, in 2019, on the back of a church bulletin. And there it was. There was the whole thing. She used to come home and tell me about it, he said. 31 years she taught those classes, and 31 years she watched them get cut. Shop first, then auto, then the whole vocational track. He was talking to the table. By the end, she had a room with no machines in it. They gave her a room with no machines in it, and called it a career center. Oh, God. And she'd say to me, Hollis, we've taught an entire generation of children that working with your hands means you failed at something else. He shook his head slowly. Every kid who ever came through her door. Somebody had already told them they were the ones who didn't make it. Long pause. She hated that more than she hated her diagnosis. I mean that literally. She hated that more. Nobody said anything for a while. The radiator clanked twice and settled. I hired a GC in September, Hollis said finally, and the softness went out of him like a light going off. Fired him this morning. Why? Cheap drywall where the plans say fire rated, cutting corners in the framing, and a change order that didn't match anything on this earth. Did you get his... I got everything. He waved a hand. Point is, I need a new general contractor. He pointed the finger at me. Somebody who knows how to frame a wall that won't come down when a 17-year-old backs a pickup truck into it. I sat there holding a dead woman's floor plan. Hollis, I do bathrooms and kitchens. I'm a one-man outfit. You've got a crew. I don't have a crew. I've got a crew, he grunted. Paying 'em double scale. I need somebody to run 'em. I need somebody who knows the math. He tipped his head at his daughter. She ran your background. Architecture right. And there's the sting. 3rd year. Every time. 3 years of one, I said. Before the money dried up. Liar. Say it. Say the true one. She's sitting right there, and she already knows every number in your account, so say the one thing she doesn't know. Close enough, Hollis said. You take the job. Standard commercial rate. Hollis, plus 20%, because you've got to deal with me breathing down your neck. And Marlo Renner, who 12 minutes earlier had been crying without sound. At my kitchen table, said quietly into her beer, he's a nightmare to work for. Beat. But the check's clear. I make sure of it. I looked at the drawing again. Bays. A mezzanine. Timber columns you could park a train on. It was exactly precisely, down to the last dimension, the kind of job I used to draw on napkins when I was 22 years old, and still believed I was going to be somebody. Before life ground me down into patching holes in rich people's bathrooms and arguing about the difference between eggshell and bone. All right, Hollis. I folded the paper. But I buy my own screws. I don't trust your judgment. And the old man laughed. Loud, booming. It filled that shoebox apartment and rattled the cans on the table and chased the last of the cold right out the window and into the night. And Marlo looked at her father, laughing like a woman looking at a photograph she thought had been lost. I hadn't seen him do that. She hadn't seen him do that in 4 years. They left around 11. Hollis went first down the stairs, one hand on the rail, refusing help twice. Marlowe stopped in the doorway. "Emmett." "Yeah, the check." "What about it? I never canceled it." And she went down the stairs before I could answer. I told my mother on Sunday. She was at her kitchen table doing a crossword left-handed, and she'd been at it 40 minutes and finished 4 clues, and neither of us said one word about that. "Ma, I got a job." "You have lots of jobs." "A big one. Commercial. Old warehouse in Pilsen, a trade school for kids. I'd be running it. General contractor." She put the pen down, and I waited for it, because I had driven over there with the whole thing rehearsed. The rate, the 20%, the timeline, the part where I'd say, "Ma, this pays for your hand in January," which was the actual sentence, which was the only sentence that mattered. I never got to it, because Loretta Kovac looked at her son across that table, and her face went calm. The bedsheet face. "Who's paying for it?" "His name's Hollis Renner. He's Renner Freight." "Yeah. Emmett." "Ma, it's a real contract. Signed. Standard commercial rate plus honey." She put her good hand over mine. "Rich people don't keep you." And I opened my mouth to argue. Except she wasn't finished. "Your father put 11 years into DeForth Brothers." 11 years. And when they sold the yard, do you know how much notice they gave the men? I know how much notice they gave the men. 6 days, she said. 6 days and a ham at Christmas. She patted my hand twice and took hers back. "They're very nice to you, right up until the part where they're not. And you won't see the line coming, because they draw it in a room you're not in. This is different." That's what he said. "Ma." "I'm not saying don't take it." She picked her pen back up. "Take it. Take their money. Take all of it. God knows we could use it." She looked down at 14 across. "Just don't take it personally when it ends." I drove home in the dark, and I want to tell you I dismissed it. I want to tell you I laughed it off and turned on the radio. I didn't. Because that woman has been right about almost everything my entire life. And because, somewhere in a glass tower downtown, there was still a $10,000 check that had never been canceled. And because I had just agreed to build a monument to a dead school teacher for a family that had already put my mother's surgery in a folder. I lay in bed that night with the drawing on my chest. Timber columns you could park a train on. And I thought she's wrong. And underneath that quieter, in a voice that sounded a lot like a 14-year-old boy watching his father sit down on a stair and not get back up. Please let her be wrong. The building was 121 years old, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever been handed. 1904 Mill Construction. 21st Street, half a block off Ashland. Common brick, on the color of old brick everywhere in this city. Rust and soot and rain layered on so long it stopped being color and became history. And inside timber columns, 14-inch square heart pine, straight as a plumb line after 121 years of holding up a roof. You put your hand flat on one of those columns, and you can feel the building standing. They cut those trees before my great-grandfather was born. Somebody milled them by hand. And then a company that made railcar seats went out of business in 1981, and the whole thing sat empty for 44 years with pigeons in it. First Monday of the job. I got there at 6:15. Hollis Renner was already inside, standing in the middle of that empty floor in his canvas jacket with a battered steel thermos in one hand, arguing with an electrician about conduit placement. 6:15 in the morning. 78 years old. That runs wrong. Sir, the plans. The plans got drawn by a man who's never had a kid drop a pipe wrench off a mezzanine. Sir, move it 18 inches. That was the whole 2 months right there. That was the entire experience of working for Hollis Renner, compressed into one exchange at 6:15 in the morning. He was a nightmare. She'd warned me. She hadn't warned me enough. He fought the plumber about water pressure. He fought the sprinkler contractor about head spacing. He fought a city inspector about a handrail, and one which I have never seen another human being do in my life. But here's the part. The old man would strap on a tool belt and sweep sawdust for 4 hours if it kept the momentum going. I caught him at 4:40 on a Thursday afternoon alone, pushing a broom down Bay 378 years old. Humming. He never once asked anybody to do something he wouldn't do. And that buys a crew. That buys a crew faster than double scale does. And me, I want to tell you what it was like, and I'm going to fail, but I'll try. I had spent 7 years patching holes in other people's bathrooms. 7 years of the grout is the wrong white. And then, one morning, I was standing on a plywood deck with a set of drawings, and 12 union guys were looking at me. And one of them said, "Boss, what do you want on the north wall, boss?" And something came back up out of the ground in me. Because the architecture came back, all of it. 3 years of school I told everyone I couldn't afford to finish came roaring back like it had been sitting in a drawer, waiting. Load paths, shear, the fire separation between the metal bay and the wood bay. I redrew the mezzanine stair in a notebook on the hood of my van, because Estelle's sketch had it at a rise that would have killed somebody. And the structural engineer looked at my notebook and said, "Yeah, that works." And I had to go sit in the van for a minute. 7 years. 7 years I thought I'd wasted that. Marlo started showing up on Fridays. Week 1, she came in a black town car and stood by the entrance in a trench coat that had never been near a job site reviewing expense reports on a tablet. "Overseeing the investment," she said. Week 2, same thing. Except she stayed 2 hours. Week 3, she asked me a question about the electrical rough-in, and it was a good question. Week 4, no tablet. Week 5, she came in wearing a Carhartt jacket, so new, the tag was still folded inside the collar, and one of the iron workers, a guy named Jedzic, who'd been on jobs since 1994, looked at her, looked at me, and said absolutely nothing at all, in a way that took considerable effort. Warehouses strip you. I don't know how else to say it. There's something about a building with no heat and no finishes, and 44 years of pigeon dust in it that takes people's costumes off. By December, she was eating tacos off a paper plate on a stack of 3/4 ply. By mid-December, she knew every man's name on that crew. By the week before Christmas, she'd learned to say tolerance correctly, which sounds like nothing, but if you've ever heard an MBA say the word tolerance on a job site, you know exactly what I mean. Now, the kid. Second week of December, cold enough that the mortar wouldn't cure, and we had to tent and heat the north wall repointing. Somebody was taking copper. Not a lot. Not enough to file on. A coil here, some scrap off the roll there, the kind of pilfering that every job site in Chicago has had since Chicago had job sites. So I stayed late. And at 9:40 on a Tuesday night I came around the corner of the loading dock with a flashlight and caught a 17-year-old kid with about $40 of stripped wire in a backpack. He didn't run. That's the thing I noticed first. He didn't run. He just stood there with the light on him and his jaw set and said, "You gonna call it in or what?" Ezekiel Duran, goes by Zeke. 5'8", maybe 130 pounds, soaking wet, and a face that had already decided how this was going to go, because it had gone that way before. I know that face. I have worn that face. How much do they give you for that? Huh, the copper. What's it going for? He blinked at me. $3.50 a pound. So you got what, 12 pounds there? 9. I clicked the flashlight off. So $30. You're out here at 9:40 at night in 28 degrees for $30. Man, are you gonna call the cops? Or are we doing a math class? And I stood there in the dark, with a kid who was shaking and pretending he wasn't. And I thought about what my life would have looked like if one single adult had ever looked at me and seen something other than a problem to be processed. Put the wire back. What? Put it back on the roll. Neat. I'm not doing it for you. He put it back. Be here Saturday, 7 a.m. For what? For a day's work. 16 an hour cash, and you don't touch anything I don't hand you. He stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Why? And I said the only true thing I had. Because somebody should have done it for me. He came Saturday. 6:50, actually. 10 minutes early, standing outside the loading bay, with his hands jammed in a hoodie that was not warm enough for December in Chicago. And I gave him gloves and a broom, and he did not complain once. And at the end of the day, I put $480 in his hand, and I watched a 17-year-old kid try to figure out how to hold that much money. He came back the next Saturday, and the next. By January, Dzidzic had him running a chalk line. By the end of January, he could cut a bird's mouth on a rafter tail, and he made me look at it 3 times. He lived with his grandmother, Ophelia Duran, 71 years old. 2-flat on 19th brick, bought in 1979, paid off in 2011, and she had a plaque by the door from her church that said, "God bless this house," in Spanish, that her husband had hung the week they moved in, and that she had never once let anyone take down, even when the frame rotted because he'd hung it. She fed me the first time I dropped Zeke off. That's not an exaggeration, and it's not a figure of speech. I stepped in the door to say hello, and I did not get back out of that house for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I left with a container. Some of you know exactly the kind of woman I'm describing. You might be the kind of woman I'm describing. But something was wrong in that house. I clocked it the second visit, because there was a bucket in the back bedroom. A 5-gallon bucket set on a folded towel under a stain the size of a dinner plate. And when I looked up at that ceiling, the plaster had that ripple in it, that slow wave. The one that means water's been coming in for a while, and going somewhere you can't see. Ophelia, when'd you have the roof done? And she said, bright as anything, oh, in September. It's brand new. September, brand new. And it was leaking in December. So I climbed up. Sunday afternoon, my own ladder, my own time. And I got up on that low-slope roof over the back porch addition, and I stood there and my stomach went down into my boots. Because it wasn't a bad roof. I want to be very clear about this because it matters for everything that comes after. It was not a bad roof. A bad roof is incompetence. A bad roof is a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. This was a designed roof. The front, the part you can see from the sidewalk, the part a daughter driving by on Sunday can see from the street, the front slope was real. New shingles correctly nailed, 6 nails properly staggered. Looked beautiful. And then it stopped. 12 feet back where the sight line from the street ends, it just stopped, and everything from there to the parapet was the original roll roofing, with a coat of aluminum paint over it. Painted. They painted the old roof silver so it would look new from above, and there's only one reason to do that, and the reason is that somebody might climb a ladder someday. And the flashing at the chimney, there wasn't any. They caulked it. They ran a bead of exterior caulk around a chimney flashing joint, and the caulk had already let go in 3 places because it was December in Chicago, and caulk is not flashing, and every roofer who has ever lived knows that. I sat down on that roof. 28 degrees, and I sat down on Ophelia Duran's roof and put my head in my hands. How much did she pay? Zeke was at the bottom of the ladder. He didn't answer. Zeke, how much did your grandmother pay for this roof? $1,400. $14,000 for $1,100 of work and a can of aluminum paint. $14,000 from a woman who cleaned offices downtown for 31 years and had that money because she and her husband put it away, $80 a month for 3 decades in a credit union account. And that's when I understood why the kid was stealing copper. He wasn't buying sneakers. He was 17 years old, and he was trying to put $14,000 back in his grandmother's account, 9 pounds at a time. I came down the ladder. He wouldn't look at me. Does she know it's fake? No. Zeke. She cried, man. His voice cracked on it. She stood in the yard, and she cried, and she said Poppy would have been so happy the house was taken care of. What am I supposed to do with that? And I stood in that yard, in the cold, and I had absolutely nothing to say to him. Except, here's the part where it turned. I went and looked at the ceiling stain again from inside, and I stood there thinking about that silver paint, and it snagged on something. Because I had seen that roof before. Where? Where have I seen October? 33rd and Wallace. A woman named Cheryl. Something called me for a bathroom estimate, 70-something house full of ceramic birds. And I'd gone up on her roof because she asked me to look at a drip in the back hall. Front slope, new. 12 feet back, silver paint. Caulk at the chimney. I'd told her it was garbage work, and she'd gotten upset, and said the man had been so nice, and I'd given her my card, and she never called, and I had driven away, and forgotten it in about 90 minutes, because I had my own problems. And then August. 51st near the boulevard. A referral that fell through. Same thing. Silver paint on the back half. 3 houses. 3 houses in 3 different neighborhoods 5 miles apart, no shared blocks, no shared streets. Same roof. Exactly the same roof. The same 12 feet. Now listen. Anybody can do bad work. Bad work is everywhere. But bad work is random. Bad work is a guy who's lazy in different ways on different days. Nobody paints exactly 12 feet of silver on 3 separate houses across half a city by accident. That's not laziness. That's a procedure. Somebody wrote that down. Somebody trained a crew. Somebody said front slope, real back slope, paint caulk the chimney. 12 feet is where they stop looking from the street. And I want you to understand, I didn't figure this out because I'm clever. I figured it out because I'm a tradesman. A cop would never see it. A lawyer would never see it. You have to have been on a roof in December to know that 12 feet is exactly where the sightline dies. Sometimes the only person who can see the crime is the person who knows how the work is supposed to be done. I got the paperwork out of Ophelia. Took an hour. Because she was ashamed, and she didn't want the boy to know, and she kept saying, "It's fine, me, Joe, it's fine." Which, God, every one of you knows that sentence. It's fine. The way our mothers say, it's fine. It's a hand. It's fine. Next year. She had it in a manila envelope in the buffet drawer under the good tablecloth. Landmark Restoration Partners, LLC. Nice logo. A little house with a shield around it. Address on Cicero Avenue. I drove out there Monday on my lunch. It's a mailbox. It's a mailbox inside a shipping store between a nail salon and a place that cashes checks. So I did what a contractor does. I pulled the LLC on the Secretary of State site. $2. Registered March of last year. Registered agent, a service company in Naperville. Manager listed as a name I'd never heard. And then I did it again. Heritage Home Shield LLC. Registered 11 months before that. Same registered agent. Same Naperville service company. Prairie State Exteriors, registered before that. 3 shells, each one alive for about 11 months, and then gone quiet. Which is when I stopped being a contractor and started being something else. Because I sat in my van outside a shipping store on Cicero Avenue with a $2 printout on my knee, and I asked the question that changed everything. How did he find them? Because think about it. 3 houses, 5 miles apart. Different neighborhoods, different parishes, different everything. Ophelia Duran on 19th, Cheryl on 33rd. A woman on 51st I never met. How does a man in a truck find those 3 women? He doesn't knock on every door in half of Chicago. That's not efficient. That's not a procedure. He had a list. I asked Ophelia one question. Before the roofer came, did anybody call you about the house? And she said, oh, the warranty people, the nice young lady. She called about the furnace, and we talked for a long time. She was very sweet. She asked about the house, how long we'd been here, whether my husband still handled the repairs. There's a whole industry that sells things to people over the phone, and the calls get recorded, and the answers get kept, and the answers get sold. Name, address, age, homeowner, how long in the home, and whether there's a husband. That data moves. It gets bought and cut and resold and cut again, and somewhere down that chain a man can buy a list, and he can sort that list any way he likes. Over 60, widowed, owns the home outright. He didn't find Ophelia Duran. He sorted for her. She was a row in a spreadsheet before she was ever a woman crying in her own backyard, because she thought her husband would be happy the house was taken care of. I sat in my van for a long time after that, because I finally understood what I was actually looking at. This was not a bad contractor. This was an industry. I brought it to Marlowe on a Friday in the 2nd week of January, not on the site. She came to my apartment, which she'd done twice by then, which is a sentence I still find strange to say. I put it on the Formica table. The 3 LLCs. The registered agent. The photos of 3 roofs. Ophelia's contract. She read it standing up. Then she sat down. Then she read it again. Emmett. Yeah. This is... She stopped. Started over. I have a forensic firm on retainer that bills $480 an hour. Okay. They spent 9 months on Prosser. They found the $2 million. They found the wire transfers. They found nothing else. She looked up at me. You found this, with a $2 printout and a ladder. I found it, because I've been on that roof. And then she went very still. Say the name of the registered agent again. I said it. Marlowe Renner's face did something I had not seen it do. She got up and went to her coat, and came back with her phone, and pulled up a PDF from 4 years ago, a filing from the lawyers from the Prosser matter, and turned the screen around. Same Naperville service company. Same agent. It's him. Marlowe, it's him. Her hands had gone flat on the table. He didn't leave. He didn't stop. He took $2 million off my father, and he used it as seed capital. And I said the thing neither of us wanted said. He couldn't do this before. What? $2 million, Marlowe. Trucks, crews, insurance certificates, a call center relationship, You can't run 3 shells and a supply chain on nothing. I tapped the table. Your father's money built this. She didn't cry. I almost wish she had. She sat at my kitchen table completely still for about 40 seconds, and then she said in a voice I'd never heard out of her, "He doesn't know that. My father doesn't know that. No, he can never know that." Now, Tuesday, January 13th. The story ran at 6 a.m. on a business site, and by 9, it was everywhere. The billionaire CEO and the broke contractor inside Renner Freight's curious new investment. And in the middle of it, reproduced redactions and all my file. My account balance, my student loan, Bridgeport, the 2 lost referrals, and my mother's name, Loretta Kovac, employer, 26 years, scheduled procedure deferred, my mother's deferred hand surgery, on a business news site, read by 400,000 people who had never met her and never would. I stood in the middle of that warehouse with my phone in my hand and 12 men trying very hard to look busy, and Dzidzic came over and put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Hey boss, it's just the internet." It wasn't just the internet, because a woman who has smoothed everything over like a bedsheet her entire life had to walk into a hospital cafeteria that morning and serve breakfast to people who had read about her hand. Marlowe called me at 9:40. It was Ridgeline. What? Ridgeline Diligence, the firm that ran your file. Her voice was doing something terrible. It was completely level, and it was shaking underneath both at once. There were 9 copies of that document, 3 at Ridgeline, 6 in my company. Ridgeline sold it. To who? Silence. To who, Marlowe? Curtis Vandermeer. And there it was. The man from the boardroom. The man who said conservatorship the way you'd offer somebody a chair. I wanted the Pilsen project to look like what the file made it look like. An eccentric old man's money flowing to a broke stranger. He wanted a headline he could hold up in a boardroom in March. So he bought a document that a woman had commissioned in November, and he handed it to a reporter in January. "Emmett, I need to say something, and I need you not to interrupt." "Say it." "I built that file." "Beat." "I paid for it. I asked for the personal financial section. I asked them to go deep." "Beat." "Vandermeer didn't create that weapon. He just picked it up." And then Marlowe Renner said the sentence I think about more than almost anything else in this whole story. "I did this to your mother in November. It just took until January to land." I didn't say anything for a while. "Are you going to say something?" "I'm thinking." "Emmett, you want me to tell you it's okay?" "Yes, it's not okay." Silence on the line. "But you didn't sell it. You built it and you shouldn't have, and you know that. The man who sold it is the one I want." 2 days after that Wednesday night, Marlowe sent me a file at 11 at night with no message attached. Her people had gotten a piece of the list. I don't know how, and I decided a long time ago I didn't need to. 460 rows. 460 women. Names, addresses, ages, marital status, years in home. Sorted by zip. And I scrolled. I scrolled through 460 women who somebody had sorted for, and I saw Ophelia Duran on row 112. And I scrolled further. And further. Row 388. Kovac Loretta, 62, F, widow, owner, 1994. I put the laptop down on the counter very carefully like it was hot, and then I stood in my kitchen, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to put them flat on the counter, and I heard myself say out loud, to nobody in an empty apartment, "No, not her. Not her, not her, not. She's had that house since I was 3 years old. She paid it off in 2019, and she called me crying, and I took her to dinner at a chain restaurant, and she ordered the cheapest thing on the menu anyway. Row 388, I called her at 11:40 at night. 6 rings. Emmett, what's wrong? What happened? Nothing, Ma. I'm fine. It's midnight. Ma, has anybody come by the house? Anybody about work on the house? And my mother said, well, there's a very nice man coming tomorrow morning about the porch. I did not tell Marlowe. I did not tell Hollis. I did not call the police because there is no crime yet in a man standing in your mother's kitchen with a clipboard, and I knew that, and I have thought about it every day since. I told the crew I had a thing, and I drove to the house I grew up in, and I parked 4 doors down at 10:15 in the morning, and I waited. He got there at 10:50. White pickup clean, magnetic door sign, ladder rack with a ladder that had never been used, which I noticed because I notice ladders. And he was good. That's what I wasn't ready for. He was good. 50s, maybe 48. He looked younger than his file. Gray at the temples. Fleece vest over a button-down boots that were worn but not beat. He carried a clipboard and a leather folio, and he had this way of standing about 1.5 feet farther back from the door than a salesman stands. Because a salesman crowds you. He didn't. I gave it 11 minutes. Then I walked up the driveway of the house I grew up in, and I opened my mother's back door without knocking, the way I have opened it my entire life. They were at the kitchen table. My mother had made coffee. The good cups, the ones from the china cabinet, the ones that came out for the priest, and for my father's brother, and for nobody else. The contract was open in front of her, and there was a pen in her right hand. Her right hand. The hand that goes numb. She was holding a pen in her right hand because a nice man had come to the house, and she was not going to be rude in front of company. Emmett Honey. This is Mr. Lyle Prosser. The kitchen went quiet, and I watched him. I watched him take the hit and process it and recover, and it took him under a second, and honest to God, it was almost impressive. Have we met? No. Well. He half stood, put a hand out. Warm smile. Any friend of Mrs. Kovacs? That's down. He sat down. I pulled out the 3rd chair, my father's chair, the one nobody has sat in since 2016, and I turned it around and I sat down in it. Ma, put the pen down. Emmett, he's being very... Ma. She put the pen down. Mr. Kovac, I understand the concern. Sons should be involved. I always say when read it out loud. He blinked. I'm sorry. The contract. Read it out loud. To her. And here's what I want you to remember about that morning. I didn't hit him. God knows I thought about it. Every cell in my body was standing up and pointing at him. But I have watched men lose everything by swinging first, and more than that. My mother was sitting right there at her own table, in her own kitchen. And if I turned that room into violence, then that room becomes the room where that happened forever, for the rest of her life. So I did something worse. I made him read. Page 1, paragraph 1, out loud. Sir, if there's a specific. Page 3, section 11. Start there. He didn't move. So I reached across and turned the pages myself and put my finger on it. Client acknowledges that all scope determinations regarding underlayment, decking, and substrate condition shall be made at contractor's sole discretion during the course of work, and that client waives inspection of concealed surfaces. I looked up. What does that mean, Mr. Prosser? Nothing. Ma, ask him what that means. And my mother, 62 years old, 26 years, carrying trays. A woman who has apologized to furniture for being in her way looked at that man in her kitchen and said very politely, "What does it mean, dear?" He didn't answer. "It means," I said, "that he can charge you for whatever he says he found under there, and you've given up your right to look at it." I turned the page. Section 14. Payment schedule. 60% on signature. 60% on signature. For a job that starts in April. "Ma, how much is the total?" She didn't answer. "Ma." $1,400. So he wants $5,640 from you today, in January, for work in April. And Loretta Kovac put her good hand flat on the table, and she said very quietly, "Oh, oh." That's all she said. Oh, and I have heard my mother say a lot of things in 29 years, but that one is the one I still hear at 2 in the morning sometimes. Because that oh was the sound of a woman realizing that the nice man at her table had done arithmetic about her before he ever knocked. Prosser stood up, smooth, unhurried. He gathered his folio and he clicked his pen and he said, "Mrs. Kovac, I'm sorry there's been some confusion. Row 388. He stopped, 2 feet from the door, and for the first time, the pleasant thing on his face came off not all the way, just an inch like a curtain moving, and underneath it was something flat and patient and entirely awake. "I'm sorry. You know what I said." And that's when the back door opened again, because Hollis Renner had been calling me since 9:30, and Zeke had told him where I went, and a 78-year-old man had driven a 1998 F-150 across half of Chicago in 26-degree weather. He came through my mother's back door with his cap in his hand, out of breath. And he stopped. And he looked at Lyle Prosser, standing in that kitchen. 4 years. 4 years and the first time Hollis Renner had laid eyes on him since a conference room full of lawyers. Nobody moved. And Prosser, I will hate him until the day I die for this. Prosser smiled. Small, almost fond, and he said, "Mr. Renner, you look well. You used her name." Hollis's voice came out of him like something being torn. "You sat at my table at Thanksgiving, and you used my wife's name. Mr. Renner, you said she taught you." And then it happened. The old man's hand came up toward his chest, not clutching. That's the movies. Real ones don't clutch, they reach like they're trying to find something in a coat pocket. And his knees went. And he went down, sideways, into my mother's kitchen table, and the good cups went off the edge, and my mother screamed, and the coffee went across the linoleum in a wave, and I got to him before his head hit the floor, but only just. Hollis. Gray. He'd gone gray, lips going a color that lips are not supposed to go. "Ma 911, I'm calling. Hollis, look at me. Look at me, you stubborn son of a—" And the back door banged, and I looked up. Lyle Prosser was gone. He walked out of that house while a 78-year-old man was on the floor of it, and he got in a clean white pickup with a ladder that had never been used, and he drove away. I found out later that Zeke had gotten the plate. 17 years old, standing at the end of my mother's driveway where he'd been dropped off, and he had the presence of mind to photograph the plate and the door sign and the ladder rack. The kid I caught stealing copper, I rode in the ambulance, and I want to tell you what that ride was like, but I've realized I only remember 3 things about it. I remember the paramedic saying, "Sir, I need you to move back," twice. I remember my mother's good cups broken on the floor as the door closed. And I remember that somewhere between 19th and the hospital, Hollis Renner opened his eyes about halfway and got one hand around my wrist with a grip that had been loading freight since 1965. And he said one thing. 2 words. Don't stop. Marlo got there at 12:20. She came through those emergency room doors in a suit running with her coat over her arm and her hair coming out of the knot. And she saw me sitting in a plastic chair with drywall dust still in the seams of my knuckles, and my mother beside me, holding her purse with both hands. And she stopped in the middle of that hallway, and I watched a woman who had once slid a check across a tablecloth without blinking put her hands over her face in front of a room full of strangers. They took him upstairs at 1. Cardiology. And at 10 to 4, a doctor came out and found the 3 of us, me and Marlo and my mother, who would not leave, who had missed a shift for the first time in 11 years, and who would not leave. And the doctor said, "Ms. Renner, has your father discussed his diagnosis with you?" And Marlo said, "His what?" "His cardiomyopathy." "I'm sorry, his what?" "Ms. Renner, your father has been under our cardiology service since May. He's been advised twice about a device that would help protect him, and he's declined both times." Silence in that hallway. The kind of silence with a fluorescent hum in it. May to Marlo said, "May 12th. 8 months." "Yes. He's been on a job site," she said, very quietly. "He's been on a job site at 6 in the morning, every day, since November." And the doctor, who I'm sure has had this conversation 400 times, and who was kind about it, that the doctor said, "Yes, he mentioned the project." Marlo Renner turned around and walked 11 steps down that hallway and stopped and put one hand on the wall. And I sat there in that plastic chair, and everything reorganized itself. Because I had spent 2 months thinking I was building an old man's hobby, a rich man's retirement project, something to keep his hands busy. That's what I thought I was doing. That's what he let me think I was doing. 8 months. He got that diagnosis in May. He bought the building in July. He put Estelle's church bulletin drawing in a folder, and he bought a 121-year-old warehouse in July, and in November, he went to a hardware store to buy a table saw with a piece of paper in his pocket with my name on it. 21 days, he carried that paper. He wasn't building a workshop. I was racing a clock. And I had been standing next to him for 2 months arguing about conduit placement. And I never once, not once, looked at that old man and asked him if he was all right. They kept him 9 days. 9 days on the 7th floor of a hospital where my mother had been serving trays since I was 3 years old, which meant that on day 2, a woman named Yvette from Nutrition Services walked into a Billionaire's room with a lunch tray and said, "You must be Loretta's Mr. Renner." And Hollis Renner, who had fought a city inspector about a handrail and won, went completely quiet and said, "Yes, ma'am." She brought him extra pudding every day after that. 9 days. He hated all of them. Here's what happened on day 4. The board voted. They didn't wait for him to be discharged. Curtis Vandermeer called an emergency session on a Thursday morning, while the man was on the 7th floor with a monitor taped to his chest, and 11 people sat around a table long enough to land a plane on and voted to freeze the Pilsen project. Not cancel. Freeze. Because freeze sounds temperate. Freeze sounds responsible. The motion cited founder health concerns, reputational exposure following recent press. And I want to read you the actual phrase because I've read it maybe 200 times. The absence of a demonstrable return to shareholders. The absence of a demonstrable return. On a building where a dead schoolteacher's drawing was going to become a room with machines in it. The funding stopped Friday at 4:00 p.m. I got the call at 4:06 from a man in accounts payable who sounded genuinely sorry, and I want to say for the record that he was genuinely sorry and that he had nothing to do with any of it, and that he stayed on the phone with me for 11 minutes, explaining what he was and wasn't allowed to release. 12 men on the crew, and the money stopped. I stood in the middle of that warehouse Saturday morning with the space heaters running on borrowed propane, and I looked at what we had. The mezzanine was framed and decked. The fire separation was up and rated. Rough electrical was done. Rough plumbing was done. The north wall. Cured out, beautiful. Left to do finish electrical trim. Dust collection. Compressed air lines. Floor sealer. Overhead door operator on the auto bay. Final inspections. 3 weeks of work, plus 2 more waiting on the inspection calendar, and a dust collection unit on back order out of Wisconsin. $91,000 all in. $91,000. I want to tell you what I had. I had $11,200 in an account that had been negative $406 in November, because I'd been paid well for 2 months, because I'd been paid right for the first time in my working life, and I'd put nearly every dollar of it away for my mother's hand, which was scheduled. February 11th, $4,100 out of pocket, and the rest of it sitting in a savings account I hadn't touched, because for the first time since I was 22 years old, there was a number in my life that was going up instead of down. 91,000. 11,200. You do that math however you want. It doesn't come out. So I drove out to Cicero Avenue on Sunday and sat in the parking lot of a shipping store that was closed in front of a mailbox that had a fake roofing company in it, and I did what I do. I did 3-card Monte against myself. The van's worth 22 on a good day, 14 at a fast sale. Tools, all of it, the whole trailer, the miter station, the good compressor, maybe 10. 24, best case. Still 67, short. And no van. So no business. So no way to earn back any of it. And then that other voice. The quiet one. The reasonable one. The one that always sounds so much like common sense. It's not your building. You're the GC. You're not the owner. You're not the bank. Your contract has a suspension clause. You read it. You initialed it. You are legally and morally free to walk away right now. Nobody would even blame you. The board froze it. You didn't. And here's the thing that scared me. That voice was right. That voice had a point. That voice had every single time had a point, because I have heard that voice before. I heard it in March of my 3rd year of architecture school, sitting in a hospital parking lot, exactly like the one I'd been sitting in 11 days earlier, holding a phone with my father upstairs, and a studio review the next morning that I had not slept for. And that voice said, "You can't do both." And it was right. You can't do both, so pick. And it was right. He's sick, and she's working doubles, and you're playing with drawings. And it was no, that's the lie. That's the lie I've told for 10 years. And I got so good at it, I stopped hearing it as a lie. Because here's the truth. I didn't leave school for my father. I left school because I was failing. 2nd semester, 3rd year. Structures 2, and site and environmental. I was working 32 hours a week at a lumber yard and sleeping 4 hours a night. And I was 3 weeks behind. And I was going to have to go to my advisor and say I need help, and I could not do it. I could not make my mouth say it. And then my father got sick. And a door opened. Because if I left for him, if I walked away, because my family needed me. Then I wasn't a kid who was drowning and too proud to raise his hand. I was a good son. I have let my mother believe for 10 years that she and my father cost me my career. She has apologized to me for it, more than once, in her own kitchen. And I sat there, and I let her. I sat in that parking lot on Cicero Avenue on a Sunday in January, and I finally said it out loud to nobody, and it came out of me in a way that was not dignified. I quit because I was scared. Then I drove home, and I went out to the van, and I opened the toolbox behind the passenger seat, and underneath the impact sockets, there was a tin, a drafting pencil tin, green, rusted at one corner. My father's, 10 years 7 vehicles 4 apartments, never opened it, not once. I moved it from truck to truck like a man moving a body. I opened it in the cab, with the dome light on. 6 drafting pencils, 2 erasers, hard as stones, a brass sharpener, and underneath folded in quarters, gone soft at the creases, like something handled 1,000 times a drawing. My father was a millwright. He was not an architect, and he never pretended to be. But he had drawn a house, ranch, 3-bedroom, attached garage on the north side, drawn to scale with a straight edge, and those pencils with the dimensions written in a millwright's careful block lettering, and a north arrow in the corner because he'd looked up how to do a north arrow. And in the bottom right, in the title block, he'd drawn himself for Loretta. Someday, dated 1998. He never built it. He never had $11,000 at one time in his entire life. He drew a house for my mother and put it in a pencil tin and went to work at a plant for 11 years and got 6 days' notice and a ham at Christmas. And I sat in a cold van in an alley in Chicago, and I cried the way I have cried maybe 3 times as an adult. Because he wasn't a failure. He wasn't a failure. He was a man who wanted to build something for somebody he loved, and the money never came. And I had $91,000 of work to finish, and $11,200 in an account, and a building with timber columns you could park a train on, and a dead schoolteacher's drawing pinned to the wall of the trailer. And I was going to walk away from it, and call it common sense. Monday, 7:00 a.m. I stood on a pallet of floor sealer in front of 12 men and told them the truth. All of it. The freeze, the numbers, the whole thing. So here's where we are. I've got $11,000 of my own money. I'm putting all of it in. I'm putting the van and the trailer up this afternoon, which gets me maybe another 22. Nobody said anything. That's 33 against 91. I'm going to spend today calling every supplier we've got and begging. Some of them will say yes, most won't. Djedzic had his arms crossed. I can't pay you Friday. I'm telling you that now, so nobody finds out at the window. If you walk today, you walk with my full respect, and I'll give you a reference to anybody in this city. Silence. Long enough that I started to flit in my stomach. Then Djedzic said, "Where's the old man? 7th floor, Mercy South. He coming back? Doctors say no. He says yes." And Djedzic uncrossed his arms and said, "Yeah, he's coming back." Here's what actually happened over the next 5 weeks. And I want to be honest, because the version where 12 heroes work for free is a nice story, and it is not what happened. 4 men left. They had mortgages and kids, and one of them had a wife going through treatment, and every single one of them was right to leave, and I meant every word of every reference I wrote. 8 stayed. 8 men worked at half rate on a handshake and a promissory note. I typed myself on my own laptop at 1 in the morning. The suppliers were the miracle. Kaminsky Electric Supply carried us. $31,000, 90 days no interest on a phone call, because Ray Kaminsky learned the trade in a high school shop program that Estelle Renner spent 9 years fighting the board to keep open, and he had never once forgotten her name. He said, "Send me the invoice in April." I said, "Ray, I can't guarantee." He said, "Send me the invoice in April, Emmett," and hung up. Zeke Duran worked 26 days straight. 17 years old. Every day after school, and every hour of both weekends, and on day 19 I told him to go home, and he said, "No." And that was the entire conversation. I paid him. Every week. Full. Out of the 11,000. That was non-negotiable, and he fought me about it, and he lost. And Marlo, I have to tell you what she did, and I have to be careful, because it would be easy to make it sound like the rich woman swooped in and wrote a check. She didn't. She couldn't. That was the entire point. Her personal wealth was tied up in the same trust the board was circling, and every operating dollar she controlled was corporate, and the corporation had voted. What she did was harder. She fired Ridgeline Diligence on a Tuesday, publicly, in a statement with her name on it that said the firm had breached its confidentiality obligations, and that Renner Freight would be pursuing remedies, and this is the part her general counsel begged her not to include. The commissioning of that report was my decision and mine alone. The individuals named in it, including a 62-year-old hospital food service worker who has no connection to this company, were subjected to invasive scrutiny at my direction. That was wrong. I apologized to them without qualification. Her stock dropped 4% in a day. Vandermeer went on television, and Marlo Renner spent February doing the thing she is actually extraordinarily good at. She took what I found on a roof with a $2 printout, 3 LLCs, 1 registered agent, 460 rows, and she put a forensic accounting firm on it, and she found the money. All of it. The seed capital. The wire chain out of her father's line of credit. The Naperville agent. 14 separate entities across 4 states, 11 of them dissolved, 3 of them still taking deposits. And she walked it into the office of the Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Bureau herself. The thing her father could not do. Because the thing her father could not do was be publicly humiliated with his dead wife's name in the record. And Marlo Renner sat in that office and said, "Put it in. Put all of it in. Use her name. She'd want you to use her name." She told Hollis afterward. I wasn't in the room. She came out and sat down on the floor of a hospital hallway. Not a chair. The floor, a woman in a $4,000 suit sitting on hospital linoleum with her knees up, and she said, "He said thank you." And then she said, "He hasn't said thank you to me since I was 19. Now, the witnesses, because the Bureau needed complainants. Money moving is not a crime you can charge until somebody stands up and says he did it to me. You need the women. You need names on affidavits. And the women did not want to do it. Ophelia Duran said no for 11 days. Not because she was afraid of him. Because of the plaque. If I say it out loud, she told me, in that kitchen, in Spanish and English, mixed together, the way she talks when she's upset. Then the last thing that happened to this house is that a man cheated me in it. And Rogelio hung that sign in 1979. And I understood. I understood completely. She wasn't protecting her pride. She was protecting the house. She was protecting 46 years of a marriage from having a con man in the final chapter. And my mother said no, too. For a different reason, and a worse one. She said no because she was ashamed. Emmett, I signed nothing, so there's nothing to say. Ma, you had the pen in your hand. And I put it down. You put it down because I walked in. And Loretta Kovac looked at her son across the same table and said, Yes, and what does that say about me? Oh. There it is. She wasn't afraid of the paperwork. She was afraid that if she stood up in a room and said I almost gave a stranger $5,640, then everyone would know she was the kind of woman who could be gotten to. And once people know that about you at 62, in a country that is already looking past you in every grocery store and every waiting room and every phone menu that will not connect you to a human being, once they know that you become old. Not older, old, the way people say it. So I told her the truth. I sat down at that table, and I told her about structures too, and site and environmental, and 32 hours a week at the lumberyard, and 4 hours of sleep. And the advisor's office I walked past 4 times, and never went into. I told my mother that I did not leave school for her, that I left because I was drowning, and too proud to raise my hand, and that when Dad got sick, it gave me a door that looked like nobility, and I took it, and that I had let her carry it for 10 years, that she had apologized to me for it, in this kitchen, and I let her. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, I knew. What, Ma? Honey. Her good hand went over mine. You called me on a Wednesday to say you were leaving school, and your father wasn't diagnosed until the following Monday. I want you to sit with that for a second. 10 years. 10 years I carried a secret, and she'd had the calendar the whole time. Why didn't you ever? Because you needed it to be my fault, she said, and I could carry it. So I carried it. But that is what they do. That is what that entire generation of women does, and if you are one of them, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you have carried something for somebody, for years, and let them believe you didn't know it was there. She was quiet for a minute. Then she said, Get me the paper. Ma, get me the paper, Emmett. If my son can say that out loud at this table. She stopped, started again. Then I can say I almost signed something. And Ophelia signed the next day. Because my mother called her. 2 women in their 60s and 70s on the telephone on a Tuesday afternoon for 1 hour and 10 minutes. I don't know what was said on that call. I have never asked. That was theirs. 9 other women signed after them. 11 total. And I want to say the thing plainly, because this is what the whole story is actually about. Lyle Prosser did not get caught because a billionaire found his money. He got caught because 11 women over 60 decided that being embarrassed was survivable. February 28th. Opening day. It came in cold and unbelievably clear. One of those Chicago mornings after a hard freeze where the air has no forgiveness in it at all, and every edge of every building looks like it was cut with a knife. We got the certificate of occupancy at 4:40 the previous afternoon, which is the latest I have ever gotten one. And I want to be honest and say that I have never in my life been that frightened of a piece of paper. The floor sealer was 11 hours cured. The dust collection ran. The compressed air ran. Every machine on that floor was a machine Estelle Renner had put on a list on the back of a church bulletin in 2019, and Hollis had bought every one of them at auction one at a time over 8 months from a hospital bed and a truck cab and a phone. 22 machines. Every one of them cast iron. Because plastic parts break in a month, and this iron here will outlive us all. 200 people came. I don't know where they came from. I truly don't. Word went around Pilsen and Bridgeport and back of the yards the way word goes around in neighborhoods like that, which is to say, completely invisibly and faster than any press release. Ray Kaminsky came. Yvette from Nutrition Services came and brought a sheet cake. 4 of Estelle's former students came in their 40s and 50s, and one of them, a woman named Denise who runs a sheet metal shop in Cicero, stood in the middle of that floor and cried with her hand over her mouth. Hollis Renner cut the ribbon at 10. He came in on a cane. He'd lost 11 pounds, and he had a device under the skin below his left collarbone that he referred to for the rest of his life as the gadget. He was 78 years old, and he was furious about the cane. He walked in under his own power, and Jedzik started clapping, and then 8 men were clapping, and then 200 people were clapping, and Hollis Renner stood in the doorway of that building and did not know what to do with his hands. He didn't give a speech. He tried. He got about 9 words in "My wife taught in this city for 31 years." And then he stopped and stood there, and the room waited, and he could not do it. So he handed the scissors to Marlowe. And Marlowe Renner, CEO of a 900-person freight company who 6 weeks earlier had told 400,000 people in writing that she had been wrong, took the scissors and said, "My mother's name was Estelle. Beat. She kept butterscotch candies in her top drawer. She made the boys shake hands at the end of every semester. Beat. She said we taught an entire generation of children that working with your hands means you failed at something else." She looked out at that room. She was right. And this building is us saying we're sorry. Cut. Over the entrance where you have to walk under it to come in. There's a frame. Simple. Oak. Zeke built it, and it is the only thing in that entire building he was allowed to install himself, and it took him 4 tries. Behind the glass are 2 pieces of paper. The top one is a check. $10,000. Dated November 10th. Signed in fountain pen with a full hand, the way people used to be taught. Never cashed. Never canceled. Because she carried it in her portfolio for 3 months and could not make herself void it. And I did not know that until she handed it to me in February and said put it somewhere. And underneath it, folded soft, is a $10 bill. Crumpled. 11 days in a wallet that had been restitched twice. There's a small brass plate under the frame. It says the Estelle Renner Trade Center. Some things aren't for sale. Not one of them has a price. Zik Duran was student number 1, not honorary. He walked over to the table and signed the sheet at 10:22 in the morning, and the number next to his name was 1, and his grandmother took a photograph of it on a phone with a cracked screen, and then made me take another one, because her hands shook. My mother stood by the door most of the morning. Right hand in a wrist splint. February 11th, $4,100 out of an account that had gone from negative 406 to 11,200 to almost nothing again except. I have to tell you this part. Because on February 2nd, an envelope came to my apartment from Kaminsky Electric Supply, and inside was a check for $4,100, and a note in ballpoint that said, "Emmett, this is not from the job, and it is not a loan." 8 guys asked. Mrs. Kovac worked the cafeteria the whole time my dad was on 7. RK 8 men who were working at half rate. She stood there with that splint on, and she watched 200 people come through a door her son built. And at some point in the morning, I looked over, and she was talking to Ophelia Duran, and they were laughing, and I have very rarely in my life been happier than I was in that 30 seconds. Late afternoon, everyone gone. Cake gone. Doors closed, the heaters ticking as they cooled. Hollis was on a stool by the wood bay, with the cane hooked over the edge of the bench, and I was sweeping, and he said out of nowhere, I knew. Knew what? That she'd go instead of me. I stopped sweeping. What? Marlowe, that lunch. He didn't look at me. He was looking at a table saw. I put it in the calendar knowing she checks it. I've known she checks it for 4 years. Hollis, I wanted to see what you'd do with a rich man's daughter and no rich man in the room. And I stood there in the middle of a building I had almost lost my van for holding a push broom. You tested me. Yes. With your own daughter? Yes. Hollis, she ran a file on my mother that I didn't know. And his head came up fast, and his voice went hard as a hammer. That I did not know, and when I found out I drove to your apartment and made her stand in your hallway. You saw my face that night. Was that a man who knew? No, it wasn't. I thought she'd take you to lunch and be rude to you, he said. I thought she'd be cold, and you'd either take her money or you wouldn't. He turned his cap over in his hands. She went past me. She always goes past me. That's my fault, too. Why? I said. Why test me? You had a name from the hall. You had a reference from a man you trust. And Hollis Renner, 78 years old, a gadget under his collarbone, a building around him with his wife's name on the door, sat on a stool and said the truest thing anybody said to me in the whole of that year. Because I couldn't trust myself anymore. Quiet. That's what he took, son. Not the 2 million. The 2 million's just math. He looked at his hands. He took my ability to know a good man when one's standing in front of me. 50 years I could do that. It was the one thing I was good at. But I built a 900-man company off knowing who to hire in about 4 minutes flat. Beat. And then a man used my wife's name on me, and after that I couldn't tell anymore. I'd meet somebody decent, and I'd think, is this real or am I just lonely? He shrugged. One shoulder. So I stopped meeting people. 4 years. That's why the house got quiet, Emmett. It wasn't just her dying. It was me deciding I couldn't be out in the world anymore. I didn't test you because I suspected you. He picked up his cane. I tested you because I needed to find out if I was still able to be right about somebody. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything. He got himself up off that stool, the way he does 3 tries, refusing help twice, and he stood there in the middle of that floor and looked around at 22 cast-iron machines under the lights. You passed by the way. I know. No. He shook his head. I passed. And then he went out to that truck and drove himself home because he is who he is. And I let him, because he is who he is. Which left 2 of us. Marlowe was still there. Jeans, Carhartt, hair down. And she picked up an impact driver off the bench and looked at it. Show me. Show you what? You know what. So, I got a scrap of 1/2 inch off the cutoff pile and clamped it, and I handed her a screw, and she lined it up and braced her shoulder and pulled the trigger. And it went in crooked, stripped the face, and the bit skated across the board with a screech that echoed off a 121-year-old ceiling. She stood very still. Physics, huh? Red came up her neck. And then Marlowe Renner started to laugh, not the measured thing from the restaurant. The real one. The unguarded one. The one that made her sound 32 years old for the first time since I'd met her. Okay. Again. I stepped behind her, tapped her right elbow, raised it an inch. Keep it in line with the bit. Let the weight of the tool do the pushing. Quiet. Don't force it. Just guide it. She looked at me over her shoulder. Green eyes. And nothing behind them was doing arithmetic. Ready. Ready. She pulled the trigger. and the screw sank perfectly flush with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. We sat on a stack of plywood after that, and ate cold tacos out of a bag, and didn't say much. She's the chair of the foundation now. Unpaid. Vandermeer's gone March 7-4, and she read his own emails into the minutes. Lyle Prosser was indicted in June on 11 counts. He has not laughed once in any photograph I've seen of him. I have a firm now. Kovac Construction. 6 employees, which is 5 more than I've ever had. Commercial rehab, mostly. Old buildings. I like old buildings. I did not take her money. She offered. I said no. She said, it's not charity. It's an investment. I only bet on things that yield a return. And I said, then bet on it in 2 years when I've got a balance sheet. And she looked at me for a long moment and said, that's the right answer. And she has never brought it up again, and I think that might be the most respect anyone has ever shown me. I finished the certification exam in April, and in September I re-enrolled, 3rd year, Structures 2. 29 years old, going on 30 in a lecture hall full of 20-year-olds. I raised my hand in the 2nd week. That's it. That's the whole triumph. I raised my hand and said, I don't understand this, and the professor explained it, and the world did not end. 10 years. 10 years, and it took 11 seconds. Hollis Renner is still alive. He's at the shop 4 days a week. He sits on a stool by the wood bay and tells 17-year-olds they're holding things wrong. Zeke is an apprentice now. Local 1. He calls me on Sundays. And that's it. That's the whole story. A rusted F-150. A busted tailgate. 200 pounds of cast iron in the rain on a Tuesday in November. I was 29 years old, and I had $406 of debt, and a mother postponing surgery on her own hand. And I stopped because an old man reminded me of my father. I didn't know I was being tested. But here's what I've come to think, and then I'll let you go. We're all being tested, all the time. That's not a warning, it's just the arrangement. Not by billionaires, not by anybody keeping score, by parking lots, by checkout lines, by the person in front of you who's counting out change too slowly, and the neighbor whose garbage cans blew over, and the woman on the phone who can't hear you and won't admit it. Nobody announces it. Nobody ever announces it. The only way to pass a test you can't see coming is to stop performing altogether. Just be decent when nobody's watching, because somebody usually is. And even when they're not, you are. That truck is still parked outside the shop. Rust around the wheel wells. Red gone to the color of dried brick. It has no business being on the road, but it got us here.